Our guest today is someone whose artwork has been featured heavily both in museum exhibits, publications, and in the online art space as hyper-realistic or at least incredibly realistic depictions of particularly pterosaurs, but often other dinosaurs as well. One of their most recent pictures actually depicts an ankylosaur fight happening. But their recent publication that we're going to highlight throughout this interview, King Tyrant, is dedicated to the paleontological history of and new findings for the animal Tyrannosaurus rex. This author and artist, of course, is Mark Witton, one of our most beloved figures in paleo art. Dr. Mark Witton began his career with pterosaurs and moved into a wider group of animals that include dinosaurs and all sorts of other prehistoric fauna. Mark's also been a consultant for numerous paleontological and prehistoric television shows, including Prehistoric Planet. And if you're interested in more of Mark's work, he's published an incredible array of books. So let's hear what he has to say about King Tyrant and a variety of other things in the paleontological world. We're here today talking with Mark Witton, PhD, who you may know from his art you see regularly around the internet in different places. Mark is an incredible realistic paleo artist who's studied animals ranging from pterosaurs to his most recent publication, King Tyrant, going through the natural history of Tyrannosaurus rex, theories, and all sorts of different lovely depictions of this animal. Mark, you have an extensive history in the paleontology community. You've been hanging around at least since, when would your earliest piece of paleo art have been?
2006 was the first time anything was published. I suppose it was around then, sort of mid 2000s, sort of 2005, 2006. I started putting things online.
Gosh, it's been 2 decades of your art. That must be an incredible journey for you to have followed. Just kind of growing up, was paleo art something that you were interested in as a kid, or is that something that you got into later in life?
Yeah, so I've always drawn things, and I've always been interested in prehistoric animals, and particularly dinosaurs. I've always been drawing things, but I assumed my career would be more towards sort of the academic end of paleontology. Hence, why I PhD'd and this sort of thing. And now I find that I don't really fit into any one camp. So I do artwork, I write books, I write papers, and somewhere in all of this, I managed to keep a roof over my head. So it's a bit of a strange career that I have, and it's an unusual career trajectory that I've been on. But it's a fun way to make a living because every day is different. So one day I'm writing something. The next day I'm painting something. The next day I'm consulting for a documentary or something. So every day is a little bit different. Yeah, it can. So what I do is as a freelancer, and any sort of freelance work can be a bit fraught. It can be a bit sometimes you're thinking, gosh, there's not been a project coming for a little while, and you sort of hope everything will work out. And things generally have done, but it's taken a while to get to this point where you can sort of reliably make an income off this. But it's a strange little career that I've had so far, and I hope it continues for another 20 years or so.
I definitely agree. It's paleontology is already kind of a niche market. Departments never know whether we're geology or biology, and you bounce between the two kind of at random, seemingly, depending on the institution. And my understanding from the different paleo artists that are in our lab group is that it can be a long journey, in part because the art takes quite a long time to create if you're someone who's quite interested in creating realistic depictions. Do you find that there's any one component of the creation process that you enjoy the most, or any component that you enjoy the least?
It's this is a bit of a cliche to say, but it's all fun and interesting. I do especially like doing the research side of things. It's amazing that you can go to very well-trodden paleoartistic ground and there's still interesting things to find there that people haven't really touched. And sometimes you find things about the anatomy that people have overlooked, or there'll be something suggested about the behavior of an extinct animal that no one's looked at. And that's something that I'm always keen to explore in my artwork. You might remember a few years ago that there was a lot of push for lots of speculation in artwork and to show animals doing new things that we've never seen evidence in the fossil record. And while I think that's valid, what I found over the years is that there's so many things that we haven't even got to yet. And we it's not that we don't need to speculate, but that there's an extremely rich picking still to be had from our research and our data that we have on fossil animals. And that's what I think is really fun, is you draw something and you say, this isn't just me waving my arms around and going, oh, what if they did this? This is going, this is what our fossils suggest they could do. And so that's a a fun thing to bring into artwork. Obviously, then you have to actually execute the painting itself, and that's a whole other story of trying to work out nice compositions, decide what your animal's going to look like. And of course, nowadays we have an extra challenge that in some cases we know what some of these animals look like in a lot of detail. So, we're talking about some feathered dinosaurs where we know exactly how many feathers they have on in their wings and things. So you have to balance knowing what we do know with the more creative aspects of it, and then tie it all together in a way which looks sort of nice and and shows the sort of scene that you want. So it's it can be it's a process that has fun points at every step of the way.
Would there be some good examples of this in your latest publication? I'm just thinking, we have this extensive, I don't want to say fan community, but Tyrannosaurus Rex certainly has a lot of attention, and it has done since its discovery. And you talk about the 150-year history of this animal and the ways that it's been depicted over time with, I think it was 150 illustrations in your new book. I'm assuming there's some really interesting new anatomical information that you've kind of represented in some of these illustrations. Any that you want to point out in particular?
So I think with Tyrannosaurus is a fascinating animal because, as you say, it's been drawn to death. It is something that if you do a Google image search for Tyrannosaurus, it is just this infinite scroll. Who knows how many pictures of that animal exist? It's an incalculable number, and yet you can still find new things to do with it. And I think a lot of this comes from trying to appreciate Tyrannosaurus as a complete animal rather than imagining it as the version that we all know from the stereotype portrayals of it from films and documentaries, where all we ever see of Tyrannosaurus is it as a big adult eating other dinosaurs. That's basically what it does. Tyrannosaurus as a juvenile looked completely different to what the big adults looks like. As a juvenile, it's maybe about a meter long. It's got incredibly long legs. It's got longer arms. It's got a shallower face. It's a completely different looking animal, but that is just as much a valid picture of Tyrannosaurus as a big 8-ton, 12-meter long thing with giant jaws. And of course, you have every growth stage in between. So that in itself is something something not necessarily completely new to bring to the table, but it's certainly a lot fresher to say, hey, look, here's my picture of a fox-sized baby Tyrannosaurus. And then you've got all the behavioral aspects of, well, there's things like, there's behaviors for Tyrannosaurus that we have really good evidence for. So things like face biting. There's listeners may be familiar with the idea of that theropods grappled one another by biting their jaws, as do lots of living animals. It seems to be something that they do when they get to the sort of second phase of their life, or either sexually mature phase, which coincides with what we see in living animals, where face biting begins once animals get old enough to start worrying about things like territories and mating and this kind of thing. So we think that the same thing is happening for theropods. And we have extensive evidence for this in Tyrannosaurs. We have literally hundreds and hundreds of bite marks over their skulls. And we even know, in some cases, the sort of orientation of their bodies when they're engaging in face biting. We can say they're probably lining their bodies up side to side and swiping at one another with their faces. That's the kind of thing that that's excellent inspiration for drawing, because you can take all of that and say, I'm going to draw that specific thing. But again, it's amazing just how little you see images of that specific behavior, because people are more interested in showing a Hollywoodized version of Tyrannosaurus, where it's doing things that look cool in terms of a cinematic composition, rather than actually just doing what it did as an animal. And I'll give one more example, which I think is my personal favorite. A few years ago now, there was a conference abstract about how Tyrannosaurus would access the neck muscles of Triceratops by detaching the head from the body. And so to my mind, that would just be, telling all the paleoartists, like, right, go. We know that T-Rex was pulling the head of Triceratops. Go do it. How many people have drawn that? Virtually no one. And it's like, it's Tyrannosaurus pulling the head of Triceratops. Do we need to draw you a map? Come on, guys, let's get to it. So I was amazed that no one had really done that. But it's nice for me, because it means I can draw that and I can show it to people and go, look, fossils say that this was happening. So it's, even for T-Rex, there's still lots of new areas to go to, and we could list examples all day of all the neat things you can draw about T-Rex that are being neglected in typical artwork.
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes sense that we would see really different ontogenetic sequences for these massive predators, because I mean, to some extent, that's what we see with like some modern carnivores. I mean, for the listeners at home, I want you to picture what like a baby, large cat looks like with its massive feet. And, there are a lot of modern animals that we know of today that would have vastly different small forms compared to their adult forms. So I think it's actually really interesting to think about, these animals that we would see, as you say, on traditional publications, or not traditional publications, but traditional mass media as just being like smaller versions of their large, fierce mothers and fathers, the kind of Jurassic World depiction. And it's really interesting that there's all of this fossil evidence for behavior that just hasn't been looked at before. And my understanding is that something that's getting investigated more and more frequently, just kind of across paleontology. But